Hello and welcome to our next session looking at the really important topic around leadership and diversity and equity within retail. And it's my really great pleasure to be able to introduce this really special session, which is an interview with Berg, the CEO of Levi Strauss. But Chip will be in conversation with Susan Hart, who is the co-leader for the global retail practice at Stuart. And Susan, delighted you could be with us, and Chip, and looking forward very much to this discussion, as I say, around these really important topics around leadership, equity and diversity in retail. So Susan, over to you and welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, Chip, it's always really nice to see you, even if there's a video screen between us this time. Would you mind just taking a moment and introducing yourself to the group and telling them about your career here at Levi's?
Sure. Hello, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here. And Susan, it's great to be with you. And we're getting really used to Zooming and Microsoft teaming with one another. I'm Chip Berg. I'm the president and CEO of Levi Strauss & Company. I've been with the company now about 9 years. And prior to that, I spent 28 years at Procter & Gamble. So I came to the apparel industry and to retail from a consumer packaged goods background, and loving what I'm doing.
Great. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank you for being here today at the World Retail Congress and sharing your voice as a CEO on the topic of diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And Chip, I know this is a really complex topic, and I know that our conversation today might be a little imperfect, but I also know that you believe, as I do, that having an imperfect conversation on this topic is better than avoiding the conversation altogether. So let's get imperfect or more imperfect together. So my first question or comment for you to talk about is that Levi's has articulated its diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategy for many years. The company is proud of being a progressive company. It takes bold stances on important issues. Go Levi's 2020, Get Out and Vote campaign. Love that one. But after the killing of George Floyd, Levi's publicly denounced racism and stated that it was important to channel the emotions of the moment into action. One of the actions that you've taken, amongst a number of other important change initiatives, is pledging to fill a head of a diversity and inclusion role at Levi's. So how do you see that role helping to impact change in your organization? What are some of the other initiatives that you're undertaking that you believe will change the dynamics of your leadership team, the organization's culture, and your relationship with external stakeholders?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. So let me start by, I guess, saying that this company has a really long track record of standing up for social justice, racial equity, and breaking down the barriers to inclusion. When we had factories in the Southeast here in the United States, we desegregated those factories 10 years before it was the law of the land, 10 years before the Civil Rights Act. So we were way ahead, and we are a very, very progressive company, and really do stand for inclusion and equality. We were very early during the AIDS epidemic in raising awareness around AIDS. We were one of the very first companies in the United States to offer healthcare benefits to same-sex partners. We've really been on the forefront of LGBTQ equality and have taken very bold stands with respect to that. And externally, we've been very, very committed, not just in our words, but with money, with our finances, in supporting social justice and racial equality. In fact, in the last 5 years, we've invested about $35 million, mostly to organizations around the Bay Area, but really across the United States, focusing on equality. And about 85% of those organizations are led by Black and Brown leaders, and really focused on serving the Black and Brown communities and people of color broadly across the Bay Area. And so externally, we have this long track record of standing for inclusion and equality. And, after the George Floyd killing, and it really wasn't just that, it was the string of events during the period of time when we've all been in lockdown, which got such high visibility. But the George Floyd killing and arguably the Cooper video from Central Park kind of became a tipping point for us, and to some extent a moment of reckoning, if you will, internally, where we came to realize that, and it wasn't a big aha, but along this journey we came to realize we just aren't where we need to be as a company, particularly in the management ranks when it comes to equality, diversity, and inclusion, especially when it comes to Black and brown leaders, and particularly Black leaders inside our company. So it did become kind of a moment of reckoning for us. And at that point, I realized we needed to really take action here. And that's that led to a number of actions which we publicly disclosed and declared, starting with disclosing our diversity numbers here in the United States. And, kind of the first step in fixing a problem is admitting you have a problem. And the numbers don't lie. The numbers clearly, suggest that we've got an issue internally inside our house. And so the words and pictures of everything that we're doing on the outside weren't being matched by what the data was telling us internally. And one of the things that I did right after the George Floyd killing was give voice to the Black leaders inside our organization. And we have an employee resource group, which is called Onyx, which is comprised primarily of Black leaders inside the company, not exclusively, I will say. And, I had several of those leaders come and talk with me individually, and then also with my executive team to share the stories of what it's like to work inside, what it's like to live in San Francisco as a Black person, but what it's like to work inside our company as a Black person. And that was really gut-wrenching, hearing their stories that, they weren't able to really bring their true, authentic self to light. So we did make a number of commitments.
Can I interrupt a moment? What would be an example of something they brought to you that was surprising that you heard?
I think, externally in San Francisco, the stories of being pulled over by the police for doing nothing wrong and being kind of harassed to some extent. But internally, one story that sticks out in my mind is we had a young Black leader who was working in our Eureka Innovation Center, which is in a different building about 3 blocks away from our headquarters. And he had a friend who worked in the headquarters, and he had come over to visit his friend, and was, I think, in the copier room making some copies of something while visiting his friend. Somebody saw him there and told somebody else at Eureka that this guy was in the headquarters building, and his manager wound up basically giving him a hard time for being over in the headquarters. And were that person a white person, it never would have been an issue. And but the stories, there were a lot of stories. And I would say the biggest thing that troubled me was hearing people say that they didn't see role models for them inside the company. They couldn't look up the hierarchy and see people like them to give them hope that they could grow in their career inside the company. And that they couldn't, that they had to conform to a particular style and a particular way of being that wasn't allowing them to bring their full, true, authentic self to work every single day. And I feel like my responsibility as a CEO is to build a culture where people can bring their very best self to work every single day, can be their best, and don't feel like they have to fit into a mold.
So do you think that this role of a diversity and inclusion leader in your organization will help to bring about some of that change? How do you think that change will get initiated by having someone who's dedicated to helping your team in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, let's be very clear. First of all, I think change starts at the top. So if I'm not fully committed to driving this, nothing else really matters. And in fact, we had a diversity and inclusion leader, officer, who left the company about 12 or 18 months ago. And I had a vacancy in the HR officer role, and I wanted to fill that before we replaced the diversity and inclusion officer for obvious reasons. I mean, if you're being recruited and you're going to report to the CHRO, and there isn't a CHRO there, you'll say, thank you very much. I'll wait until I know who the CHRO is, because they might want to bring in their own person. So it was a sequential issue, which was part of the reason why the role was vacant. But and the prior diversity and inclusion officer did make a lot of progress in the couple of years that he was here. And probably the most notable was we got these employee resource groups off the ground and started. And so they've now been active for a couple of years. But what we really need to do is put some of these commitments that we've now made. We've gone public with our numbers. And the first thing that we've said in going public with those numbers is hold us accountable for making progress. And so I'm going to drive that from the top. But some of the other commitments we've made, we're out right now actively doing a search, as you well know, for a Black leader for our board of directors. We've committed that for every new position that we're hiring for, that the slate of candidates must be 50% people of color. And we're going to make sure that we've got processes in place to ensure that we don't just continue getting what we've always gotten before in our recruiting.
So Chip, let's stop you at that point, because I thought you said something very interesting when we were speaking the other day about these commitments, because you said, first of all, when you saw these stats, you felt like a bit of a gut punch because, again, Levi's had been working on this for many years, but the numbers weren't showing up. So you've made these commitments of adding a Black executive to the board of directors, making sure slates are comprised of 50% people of color. But you said something that I thought was really very telling about some of the systemic problems that organizations have and some of the structural problems that organizations have around racism. And I'd love for you to talk about that, because I thought that was very impactful of what gets in the way of our corporations in advancing this topic.
Yeah, and this is, I guess, part of this is the journey that I've come to understand myself. And it really started with thinking about us as a country and how we've made such little progress in 400 years of racism, and that we're not as far along as we should be in breaking down and I think there's structural barriers. There's a lot of talk about systemic racism. That suggests that, that it could be a force of nature. Structural racism is a force of man-made structures that have been put in place to prevent inclusion, to prevent, true diversity from really happening. And when I started, when numbers don't lie, when you look at the numbers that we've, been very transparent with, it is clear that internally we've got structures in place that have created these barriers to being successful in having a diverse and inclusive culture. And when you think about what those structures might be, it's how we hire, it's how we promote, it's potentially how we pay, how we career path individuals, things like that, who we give special assignments to, who we give expat assignments to. All of those are structures that are man-made by the company, by us, and for whatever reason, we have built a culture that perpetuates continuing to do the same thing and getting the same results, which is a result that is not a diverse organization. And so if you kind of step back and say, and I believe in my heart of hearts a diverse organization will outperform a homogenous one every single time. And I spent 6 years living in Asia. I saw it at work when I, had an organization that was represented by 28 different countries. And so I really do fundamentally believe in the business benefit. There's a business imperative here to really go after this. So we're now really looking hard at the structures that we've put in place to make sure that we don't keep getting the same thing we've always gotten, that we really can make structural progress in advancing this important agenda item.
Yeah. Well, I also think it's interesting, given the many years you've spent in corporate America, and it doesn't escape any of us here today that we're talking with a white male CEO committed to making change on this topic. How do we make this movement about every race and gender stepping up to the challenge of making diversity and inclusion an opportunity to embrace, not a momentary problem that we try to fix? How do we keep this momentum going across all of us, not just individuals with titles that infer diversity and inclusion?
Well, I talked about, as a leader, you have to embrace the fact that there's a business imperative here, that this will make the company stronger, it'll make the business better. But I think if you think about it from a holistic individual point of view, it will make the world a better place. I fundamentally believe that humans are good people and, are good, and that there is inherent good inside of everybody. And I do think there are opportunities on a global basis to address. This is not just a U.S. Black issue. There are inclusion and diversity opportunities around the world. Like I said, I lived in Asia for six years, and I know that in other parts of the world, there are exclusions. There are different races, ethnicities, minorities, religions that get pushed back and aren't included the way that they should be. And I do think that setting aside the business imperative of doing this, having lived in Asia, as I said, and building an organization that was incredibly diverse, 28 different nationalities in one building, in one organization, speaking over 50 different languages. And I saw the power of that and how that organization over a couple of years came together, and, race, skin color, ethnicity, home country, didn't matter after a period of time, because we were in this together, and it created a very exciting place to be and an exciting place to work.
And Chip, going back to a comment you made earlier about having the right representative group inside of an organization and a company being more successful by having that. What are your customers telling you? What are your consumers telling you? You've got a group of consumers that I would assume are pretty outspoken. They're outspoken on social media. What are they expecting of a brand that they want to engage with on this whole topic of diversity and inclusion and equity and anti-racism?
Yeah, and it's a great question. It is one of the reasons that we were so forthcoming. I mean, the Levi's brand, at the end of the day, what it's all about is authentic self-expression. That is really what the Levi's brand stands for, and authenticity being such an important piece of who we are. That's why we felt compelled to be so public and so transparent about where we stand internally and our commitment to make real progress here, and we will make real progress. But beyond that, I also think the important thing that we've done, just as I did internally by giving some of our Black leaders a voice to really talk openly, and I think this is a positive coming out of the Black Lives Matter and the movement that has happened since the George Floyd killing, is there is a voice now. There are voices now saying this has got to change. And so we have an Instagram Live account, and during the pandemic, we started by having a concert series every single night at 5:01 p.m. We featured a particular artist who was playing or singing from their home, and we would stream that live over our Instagram Live account. We actually pivoted that to conversations about race and racism in this country. And we used our Instagram Live account to use your voice. And it started with a panel that included Steve Kerr, who's the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, Pastor Mike McBride, who leads a organization here in the Bay Area, and somebody from the NAACP, and really encouraged engagement from our consumers with our consumers around this issue. And I think that's one of the most important things this brand can do, is elevate the voices around the issue of racism in this country and how we need to make progress.
So, Chip, going along those lines, what would be I know you've said this very openly too, that this current environment has really forced many leaders to look in the mirror and be honest about what they're doing inside of their organizations. What advice would you give, just from what you've learned very recently, about how to bring those conversations together with your employees, with your customers, with your leadership, with your stakeholders? What's the authentic way of doing that and really putting it out on the table so it doesn't become some sort of written piece you put out there, but it really becomes something you do from the heart and you do it regularly?
Yeah, well, we're living in probably the most incredible time period that any of us, have ever had to navigate through. Between the pandemic, the economic fallout, social injustice, throwing a wildfire in California on top of all of that. I mean, it's one crisis after another, and I do think, for leaders, this is a defining period for who we are. I mean, I've been at Levi's for 9 years. We've had this incredible turnaround. The brand has never been stronger. We took the company public 18 months ago after this, great turnaround. And but this will be my defining moment, this period of time, how we navigate the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic stronger than ever, but also authentically addressing this issue of racism and really declaring this a major point of demarcation for us as a company to make progress against. And I guess, the one thing I would say is, don't go down the path unless you're really committed to change. I mean, because once you say you're going to, make these commitments and you're committed to really addressing structural racism inside your company, you're going to be held accountable to it. And so there are a long list of things that everybody's got to accomplish in the middle of a pandemic. But I fundamentally believe that this is going to be one of the most important legacies that I will leave, is fixing this internal structural racism issue that we have inside my company.
And so as you talk about a legacy and what you and other CEOs might leave, how do you see this? How do you see organizations looking in years to come when we really have to do things differently to have people show up as their best self, which we talk about a lot? Just some of it you've said is structural, but how are we going to break through as a larger community of raising the standards for diversity and inclusion across all companies, banding together, CEOs, corporations, doing this together? What are your ideas on that front?
Well, I mean, I do think we are at a moment of reckoning, a tipping point, whatever you want to call it, where there is now an authentic voice from the Black community, from Black leaders. There's an authentic voice from CEOs, including white CEOs like me, saying progress has to be made here. but it has to be made across society too. I mean, if we tackle it inside our company and a couple of other companies do it, that's great for the companies. But unless we really tackle racism broadly across society and really make fundamental changes, it'll be one step forward, two steps back, which has kind of been the story for the last 400 years in this country. So I think fundamental change has to happen across the country. And that's a big part of the reason why, I'm wearing my Vote sweatshirt. We have one of the most important elections coming up in a long, long time. 2 years ago for the midterm elections, we formed a partnership with Patagonia and created a movement called Time to Vote, where we solicited companies to give their employees time off to vote on election day. The midterm elections in 2014 were the lowest turnout midterm elections on record. And 2016, of course, was a presidential election. 2018 was another midterm election, and we were determined to get out the vote during the midterm election. And it was the highest voter turnout since the 1960s. And I'm not saying it's all because of the effort that we led, but we got several hundred companies to join us. We're on that mission again now. We're targeting 1,000 companies to give their employees time off to vote. And let's face it, election day this year is going to be unlike any other election day we've ever faced in the middle of a pandemic. And Black and brown communities already face significant challenges, whether it's voter suppression, outright challenges that they've got to get voters to the polls. Now all of this confusion about mail-in voting, absentee voting, all of that is also an issue. So we're very focused on, democracy only works if people vote. And this isn't just about the presidential election or the federal elections. It's about making people aware of the issues at a local level that can make real changes in local government, in county government, and state governments to see the kind of progress that we need to make to fix some of the societal issues that we've got that continue to repress people of color and Black and brown communities in particular. So we're committed to it both from a get out the vote standpoint. We've got a number of big companies that have joined us, over 6 million employees, Walmart, Target, JP Morgan, Nike. I could just go down the list of large employers that have said, we will give our employees time off to vote so that they can go to the poll. And hopefully we'll make a difference at all levels. And this is nonpartisan. It's not about voting for one person versus the other person. It's about democracy only works if people can vote, and get out the vote is what it's all about.
Well, I think a very important role that you and other leaders play is banding together, because your voice is that much stronger when everyone is together. So hopefully there will be some listening today that will feel the passion that you do for this topic and how to get there. Well, Chip, I really appreciate all of your insights today. I know, again, you're very passionate on this topic, and on behalf of the World Retail Congress and all of us who are trying to be more united than divided in today's world on this topic, I really do appreciate you being so open and outspoken about where you stand on this. So thank you again for being here today. Thank you for being on screen, and I hope everyone continues to stay well in and around your world and the world of Levi's. And it was great to see you.
Thank you very much, Susan. It was great to see you too, and thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Okay, and I got to get that sweatshirt too.
We can get you one.
Okay. All right. Take care, Chip.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.